An historic collapse of the pound and an historic jump for the cost of government borrowing. Today, the new Chancellor tries to reassure the markets of his fiscal prudence. But is there any sign they're convinced? The markets will react as they will, said Kwasi Kwarteng just 3 days ago. Tonight we'll be asking how what they do will ripple into businesses, trade, jobs, mortgages, and how high interest rates will have to go to curb inflation, and what this could do to the new government's reputation for fiscal responsibility.
The big question: where will the financial fallout of last week's tax cuts take us next?
All eyes will be on the Bank of England. We'll be speaking to one of their former committee members, to Labour and political and business commentators. As 3 big lenders pool their first mortgage products, we hear how hard it is already with interest rate rises.
Our initial term was agreed and signed for 2 years at 1.7% in terms of the interest, and it's now going to rise to 3.4%, and that impacts our payment, by actually about 32%.
Good evening. It has been another day of financial turmoil that has captured attention worldwide, and another day of ordinary people trying to figure out what the Chancellor's fiscal event and the reaction will mean for them. It was Liz Truss's rival, Rishi Sunak, who warned the scale of her plans would set a run on the pound, ultimately resulting in higher mortgage rates, with savings and pensions eaten away. Well, it's too early to know if that is what the long-term future holds, but for many market watchers, tonight the key question seems to be whether a pair of holding statements from the government and the Bank of England is enough to stop a rout, which today sent sterling to its lowest level ever against the dollar. If not, the bank's governor, Andrew Bailey, has promised that he will not hesitate to change interest rates by as much as is needed. Here in Liverpool at the Labour Party conference, the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves said in her speech that last year she'd told delegates she was happy to take on the Tories on economic competence. Now, she said, I wonder if they'll even turn up for the fight. We'll discuss the politics of this crisis and of the Labour Party shortly. First tonight, we go to our economics editor, Ben Chu, at the Newsnight wall.
Kirsty, if the market reaction on Friday to the Chancellor's economic package was bad, today's financial fallout was no better. And actually, in some ways, it feels worse. Yes, we had that moment early on when sterling reached its lowest ever rate against the dollar, with a pound worth only $1.03. It did bounce back a bit, but many analysts think sterling is still more likely to fall further than recover. And some argue parity. £1 for $1 is a growing possibility. The dollar has been strengthening against most currencies in recent weeks, but sterling has been particularly hard hit. The yellow line shows sterling versus the dollar this year, down by more than a fifth, but the purple line shows sterling against the currencies of our other trading partners, also down very sharply, almost 10%. And look at what's been happening to 5-year UK government market borrowing costs. There was a major jump on Friday in response to the fiscal statement, and another upward lurch today. Be in no doubt, this is very much a response to UK government economic policy making. And then we have market expectations of short-term interest rates set by the Bank of England. That's the rate for ordinary people and businesses. They were hiked to 2.25% last week, and financial traders now expect rates to soar above 6% around the middle of next year, the purple line. What would all this mean for you, for me, for all of us? Well, the falling pound will mean higher inflation as the price of imports, including fuel, rises. And borrowing costs? Well, for the public finances, it's worrying. According to the Office for Budget Responsibility, a 1 percentage point increase in both government market borrowing costs and Bank of England interest rates would push up government debt interest spending by over £10 billion a year. So with these market moves, we could be looking at tens of billions of pounds extra. Second, think about people with a mortgage. If rates rose to 6%, someone with £200,000 of housing debt coming off a 2-year fixed rate deal next year could expect to see their repayments rise by around £600 every month. In an early indication of the seismic impact on housing, some big mortgage providers today suspended offers to borrowers due to the volatility in interest rate markets. So what will happen next? Well, the Bank of England governor released a statement today designed to reassure the markets, in which it stressed he would not hesitate to change interest rates as necessary to return inflation to the 2% target sustainably in the medium term. So, not the emergency rate hikes some expected, but don't rule those out, say analysts. And from the government, also today, in response to the market sell-off, the Treasury said there will be a new medium-term fiscal rule announced on the 23rd of November and new official independent forecasts from the Office for Budget Responsibility. But some have suggested that the Chancellor could ultimately be forced to reverse his tax-cutting plans.
It looks really like there are kind of three possible paths from here. First, that the Bank of England increases interest rates to levels that throws the economy into a big recession and craters the housing market in a bid to stabilise the pound and restore macroeconomic policy credibility. The second choice, if you like, is that the Bank of England doesn't do that in line with market expectations and the pound falls, and that hits household incomes and increases prices. There is a third route, which is that macroeconomic policy credibility is somehow restored by other means. That could be by the Chancellor reversing course, Conservative MPs revolting against the prospect of passing that fiscal event, or maybe the market's just reassessing the situation. I think it's really in the government's hands.
One thing seems clear. The financial fallout from this fiscal package is far from over. Kirsty.
Ben, thanks very much indeed. So how is the market turmoil and the government's reaction to it going down with Tory MPs? One, Kevin Hollingreight, has refused to rule out voting against Kwasi Kwarteng's finance bill. I'm joined by our political editor, Nick Watt. Nick Watt, what do you make of Tory reaction to this?
Well, Kirsty, there is a lot of disquiet tonight amongst Conservative MPs. I do not sense that we're in the territory of a leadership challenge. You remember those famous letters? Are they going into Sir Graham Brady, the chairman of the 1922 committee? I do not sense we're in that territory. But the territory we are in is Conservative MPs asking very big questions about the economic strategy of Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng. And this is what one MP, Conservative MP, not a troublemaker, this is what they told me: I think the Chancellor will have to go. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not immediately, but we have to get ahead of this. And they have to do two things to get ahead of it. One is regain the confidence of Conservative MPs, and the crucial thing is regain the confidence of the market, because those MPs are thinking that what we heard from the bank and the Chancellor this afternoon, that was not enough to reassure the markets. Therefore, there is a problem with this Chancellor. And what these MPs are saying is, look, obviously, there was already inflation in the system, but this self-inflicted wound has made that inflation worse. Inflation means a weak currency. A weak currency means inflation. Inflation means that people feel poorer. Interestingly, I was talking to a supporter of Rishi Sunak, and they're saying, look, all those warnings issued by the former Chancellor in the leadership contest, are they now coming true? But interestingly, this person obviously didn't agree with Liz Truss being leader. They're saying, look, there is still a chance that this economic strategy may work. So let's just give it a little more time. But then this person said, if it doesn't work, then we're at the start of a long, dark tunnel back to 1997 and that Labour landslide, or maybe even worse than that. Important to say, the mood in number 10 tonight is, look, it's really premature to judge a big economic strategy on the basis of some tax cuts. There are going to be big moves in the autumn from the Chancellor on promoting growth. So wait and judge him on all of that.
But what is the mood in number 11? Because you say there's going to be these big announcements, but that's November. And we know that things are moving very quickly. What chance is there that someone like Kwasi Kwarteng, with his personality, is even prepared to even think about eating humble pie and pulling back from a couple of these tax cuts?
Well, I obviously know, as most political journalists do, know the Chancellor quite well. He became an MP in 2010 and, you know, spent time with him over those years. I do have to say that sort of humble pie is not an attribute that I necessarily would associate with this Chancellor. As we know, he's very bright, he's an academic, and he's very certain in his opinions, and very certain that when somebody disagrees with him, then he doesn't overly respect their view. Let us not forget that he got rid on day one of the Permanent Secretary actually in the Treasury.
So, in fact, Andrew Bailey is going to have to do some of the heavy lifting. The Bank of England is going to have to do the heavy lifting on this.
Well, and that statement from the Governor of the Bank of England today made pretty clear that they're prepared to do what they need to do to tame inflation. They will be meeting again, and that suggests that the rises in interest rate, which are already happening, could perhaps be happening more dramatically and more quickly than we had been expecting.
Now, if we turn to Labour, there is good news for Labour tonight. You know, one poll does not make a summer.
Yes, we're always have a warning around polls, but you've still got to talk about them because both sides in the political world will be. So it's a YouGov poll in the Times tonight, and that gives Labour a 17-point lead over the Conservatives. Labour have not had that sort of lead since 2001 when Tony Blair got his second landslide. The numbers are Labour 45, Conservative 28. And what's interesting about that poll is it's showing very strong opposition to some of the core measures announced last week by the Chancellor. So you saw that
because it was after Friday that it was actually taken.
Right. So you saw that plan of his to take down the top rate of tax of 45p. That's opposed by 72%. Lifting the banker's bonus. That's opposed by 67%. And only 9% of voters polled by YouGov are saying that they believe that these measures will make them better off. As we say, only one poll. The general election is not tomorrow. It will destabilise Conservative MPs, and it will add to the sense that this Labour conference, which is a notable sign of unity, that perhaps after a very, very difficult 12 years, maybe, just maybe, this party is back in business. Liverpool, a symbol in the Thatcher era of a troubled party far from national office. Now a city rejuvenated and playing host to a party sensing its moment may be coming again. Labour in Liverpool largely uniting around Keir Starmer as Kwasi Kwarteng's throw of the economic dice raises hopes here of shifting political plates.
Our Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Into the limelight as the pound takes a battering steps a former Bank of England economist, hoping to persuade voters that Labour is now the party of economic credibility.
Last year, I told this conference that I was more than happy to take on the Tories when it came to economic competence, because I know we can win. I'm now wondering whether they even plan to show up for the fight. It's becoming clearer by the day. Labour is the party of economic responsibility and the party of social justice.
An assault on the Chancellor as Labour accepts some and rejects others of his measures. Labour would overturn the cut in the top rate of income tax, but the party accepts the 1p cut in the basic rate of income tax as a way of helping the less well off. And it also agrees with the reversing of the rise in national insurance, a stance it has always taken. Nuanced positions from Labour and treading carefully on whether this is a seminal moment.
Rachel Reeves, is this Black Wednesday?
Keeping her counsel, but Labour giants from the past and present sense a big moment.
Hi. How are you? I feel that the Labour Party now has got its act together, that it's once again a mainstream and representative party, that it has a clear set of goals and priorities, and that the Labour Party really is now back as the political arm of the British people.
Mr. Mayor, were you impressed by the...
No, I'm a happy man. Look, what you've got is a Chancellor in waiting. And what you heard from Rachel Reeves is a good compare and contrast about somebody who understands the importance of having a good economy, understands the importance of public services and the connection between good public service and a good economy. And it's lovely to hear a Labour Shadow Chancellor talking about both economic competence, economic responsibility and social justice. And you know what? She's a Chancellor in waiting.
Look, the vibe of the conference here is warm and friendly, and people are really focused on the things that we need to do to change the country for families in my constituency and everybody's constituency. But my message would be, we take nothing for granted.
Others less sure.
Hello, Andy Burnham.
God, I was trying to get past you there and give you the...
Andy Burnham thinks it's wrong to accept the Chancellor's cut in the basic rate of income tax.
So when it does land, it doesn't give money to the people who are most at risk from the cost of living crisis, those on the lowest incomes. It benefits people. I get more from it. I don't need it and I don't want it. So, you know, that's my analysis of it. I'm only giving you my honest analysis. You know, the party's taken a slightly different position on that issue, but overall has made a very strong and correct critique of the Kwarteng budget.
Mild criticism amid Labour's uplifting mood on Merseyside.
Of all the conferences since he became Labour leader around 2.5 years ago, this feels like the happiest for Keir Starmer. In his first, well, he had to speak to a camera in a room on his own because of COVID. Then last year, he found himself in a row with the Labour left over internal party rules. This year, there's a far greater feeling of unity and a sense that perhaps the wind may now finally be in their sails.
Hope over a Labour heartland, and dreams now that that spirit will spread.
Nick Watwell, I'm joined now by the Shadow Secretary for Scotland, Ian Murray. Ian, thank you very much for joining us tonight. First, we'll come to fiscal matters in a moment. Does Labour, though, want to see the Bank of England move quickly to curb inflation? I mean, there's been criticism already that it's been too slow by not doing something today.
Well, we've got this real problem now, haven't we? Because we've got, on the one hand, the government putting in policies that are making it inflationary, and on the other hand, the Bank of England to set this 2% inflationary target. So it looks as though all the predictions are that the interest rates might peak at 6%, when in actual fact that we're talking about 4% just before the mini-budget last Friday. So it looks as if the Bank of England will have to accelerate that, and they're accelerating that because of the inflationary pressures that's been put on by the government themselves.
But do you want them to move now? Do you want them to move this week? Do you think it's very important for confidence in the country, confidence in the economy and confidence of ordinary people, they move now?
Well, they're going to have to do something because the markets have already had their verdict on this Chancellor's budget, and it's not a particularly happy one. And this will affect everyone in the country. I know we're talking about markets and we're talking about the pound, which is quite an abstract thing for most people sitting around their dining tables, but it affects everyone, particularly if the response to that has to be that mortgage rates will have to go up, because that will affect many millions of people.
Well, but the point is that, you know, if you actually put interest rates up, you've got a massive problem anyway.
Well, we're now in this vicious circle of the government's own creation. We've got stagnation, we've got low growth, we've got high taxes, we've got high inflation, we've got interest rates on the way up. This is a recipe for disaster, and the government knew this, and they've now gone down this route of complete and utter economic suicide in terms of what they've put through last Friday.
But the whole point is that growth, which is what they're absolutely focused on, is really what matters, and presumably Labour is absolutely focused on it too. Now let's look at fiscal matters. You would reverse the cut in the 45p rate in the pound, but you would keep the basic rate cut, you would reverse NI, you would fund spending by borrowing, just like the government. You'd also revive plans to raise corporation tax and extend a windfall tax by $8 billion. How are you going to fund all this?
Well, look, some of the spending, or most of the spending, is about capital. Yep. It's about investing in green technologies, it's about creating the jobs of the future. All governments borrow right across the world for capital spending. What this current government are doing is they're borrowing for day-to-day revenues. They're borrowing from the public.
But whether you're borrowing for day-to-day revenues or borrowing for that, you're borrowing at rates that are on the increase.
On the increase, and they're borrowing on the basis of revenue to give tax cuts to the richest, paid for by those at the bottom, because we're going to be mortgaging this now for years and years to come.
Even when you look at the sums, you know, even if you look at extending the windfall tax to deal with energy, even if you look at reversing the 45p tax, you're not going to make all your commitments. Your massive commitments that were made today. District nurses, doctors, paramedics.
Well, all of those policies are fully funded.
But
that policy is
how
fully funded by the increase in the top rate again to 45.
No, but they can't be funded. But they can't be funded. Hang on, but they can't be funded by the top rate going back to 45%, because there isn't enough money from the rich to do that.
Well, Rachel Reeves has been very clear. In fact, she set it out at conference this time last year of our fiscal rules. And those fiscal rules allow for us to be able to take those changes in the income tax rates and fund other things. For example, the £28 billion Green Fund is for capital expenditure, making sure we can get high-quality jobs in this greener, fairer economy that we've been talking about all of this week.
But where are you going to get that fund from? That takes a while to build up. What I'm saying to you is one of your big priorities is the health service. With what you're doing, and you know, the 45 pence is not going to help you with that. You've already agreed to the tax cut from 20 to 19. Where are you going to find extra money from except by borrowing, which is getting dearer?
Yes, but it's also about growing the economy. Don't forget, this is we are going for growth too, but we're doing it in a fair way. We've got the Chancellor who's come to the House of Commons as his first act on Friday and delivered a budget that would fail an economics exam at A-level because of what he's tried to do. He's borrowing money from all of us to give tax cuts to the rich on the basis of the backs of the poor. He's getting money to people who don't need it on the backs of people who can't afford to pay it.
Would Labour rule out backing any more tax cuts?
Well, we have to look at this in the round. We get all these questions all the time about individual pieces of income tax policy. We've set out very clearly that we would put the 45p in. We've set out clearly that we would take the 1 pence reduction in the basic rate because that gives money to the poorest workers in the country who are so desperate for it at the moment in terms of this cost of living crisis. We'll set out a whole package. We don't know what the interest rates and the pound will look like tomorrow, let alone at the next election. So we'll go into that election with a package of what the economy looks like at the time. But what we won't do is give money to the richest on the backs of the poorest, and that's what this government have been doing for the last few weeks.
Ian Murray, thank you very much indeed. The spectre of rocketing interest rates has sent a shudder through mortgage lenders. 3 big providers, Halifax, Skipton and Virgin Money, have all withdrawn products, temporarily they say, because of the prospects of early and repeated rate rises. I've been out in Liverpool finding out what impact the rate rises so far are having on would-be borrowers. In Liverpool, a city that's seen virtually unparalleled property growth, prices have soared by over 40% in the last 5 years alone. But is a buoyant market in one of the country's most affordable places any match for rising interest rates? Rachel Cummings is a local mortgage broker. What are people to do when they come to the end of a fixed rate mortgage?
This is quite unfortunate for some people at the moment. So they've locked in these great fixed rates a couple of years ago, and then they're coming to the end of their fixed rate now, and they've done everything they were asked to do. They've kept their mortgage payments, they've paid all their bills, and then the next rate being offered to them for a lot of people is higher than what they're paying at the moment. And that's unavoidable, so their costs are going up, unfortunately.
Tell me what happens to clients who are coming to the end of the fixed term. They're not at it yet. What are their inclinations?
I've got a few clients at the moment who have actually exited their current fixed rates early. They've paid the fees and they've actually already remortgaged and gone into 5, 7 or even 10-year fixed rates. They just want the stability and they're petrified of what is actually going to happen, and they don't want to wait until next year to see what that will be. Obviously rates could come down, but they would rather get the stability locked in for as long as possible, and there are those clients doing that.
For new dad Aaron, the end of his fixed mortgage term has come just at the wrong time, coinciding with his wife's maternity leave and rising living costs.
My mortgage rate is increasing. I'm coming out of what was an initial fixed term and was trying to sign and get another mortgage deal, and kind of the best rate and the best price that we could find was an increase in over 30%. So it's actually gone up by just over £300. And having a little bit of a tighter budget as it comes to, you know, spending a little bit more time out, as it were, as a family. I think naturally with, you know, other costs rising in terms of energy and other bills, is going to certainly, you know, put us at quite a little bit more of a deficit. I guess I'm picking up the entirety of the mortgage costs as well. So yeah, quite a lot of pressure and a big hit.
The Chancellor's stamp duty announcement last week was met with joy by many first-time buyers and those looking to move. But today raises big questions about whether a weary population can contend with yet more high prices, this time in the housing market.
That is a very scary time. That's a huge uplift, isn't it, on an outgoing for people that are paying a mortgage, and what an uplift that is to paying a mortgage. So that is going to be seen, I think, coming through the market, and that will have an effect. They could absolutely see a rate rise, because usually when a decision in principle is placed through a lender, it's usually valid for a maximum of 6 months. Now, it can take a buyer some months to secure a purchase on a property. within which time the mortgage offer has expired, and they then have to go on to the higher rate of interest. So they will therefore be paying more in their mortgage repayment, which will in turn reduce the amount of buyers out there in the market. We haven't seen any decrease in the prices coming down on houses as of yet, but I think that will change definitely with the constant increase of the base rate and therefore the mortgage rates as well.
So could this market crisis deliver a sustained blow to businesses relying on imports, to people's cost of living, to the housing market and to the UK's reputation for sound money? How does it leave the premiership of Liz Truss? And for those gathered here in Liverpool, does it boost Labour's prospects for the next election or box the party in? I'm joined by Kitty Usher, the Institute Director. She's also a former Labour MP and Treasury Minister. Mayata Fanbula of the New Economics Foundation, who will be standing as a prospective Labour candidate at the next election, Ian Dale, broadcaster and former Conservative aide, and by Tina McKenzie from the Federation of Small Businesses. Welcome to you all. Kitty Usher, first of all, off the bat, you thought it was good news for business by and large. How are you now feeling 3 days on?
Well, there were specific items in the announcement that were what business has been calling for, particularly the reversal in employers' national insurance contributions, some more technical details about investment allowances. But we did say on Friday as well that it was of concern to business that the government hadn't published the OBR forecast, and we were right to say so, because it wasn't only concerning to business, it was concerning to the markets as well, as we've now seen.
And initially, the bullishness that came from Kwasi Kwarteng was then amplified when he said over the weekend, there'll be further tax cuts. And do you think that's perhaps what spooked the markets even further?
Yes, I mean, the problem is that nobody knows whether we can afford it or not. And so the market is pricing in the possibility that this is a big, experiment that may backfire. Now, it might be fine, but it might not be fine. And so the problem is that there isn't an official independent assessment about whether this is affordable. And without that, we can't judge, and that's what's creating instability. And interestingly, in the sort of finger in the wind of the polls that we've done of our members, and we have 20,000 SMEs across the country, it started out about 2 to 1 in favour, and now it's about evens. So I think that...
That's in the course of these 3 days?
Yes, exactly. So, small businesses, like everybody else, is looking at the headlines and realising what's happened and feeling just a sense of insecurity.
And presumably for small businesses, it hits very quickly, because they have to make judgments, for example, on imports. Most of our companies do import in some way, and sometimes for a small business it's just unaffordable.
Sure, but on the other side, if you're exporting...
If you're exporting, it's great news.
But the point is that if you feel the external environment is uncertain, then you're not going to invest.
Well, Mayata, can I come to you, because there are elements of the growth package that Labour didn't disagree with. For example, funding through borrowing. I mean, do you really now think that is the only option? And we're looking at borrowing is much more expensive than it was even 40 hours ago.
It is. I mean, look, I think there are two things. There is borrowing for investment, and actually countries across the piece are doing that, particularly in the current context. And then there is borrowing to give giveaways to the rich, which is essentially what the government's done. And I think the problem with that is that it is not clear how that then translates into economic performance and growth. There's a big gamble that we're being asked to make that suddenly this will generate improvements in performance, and that isn't clear. And I think if it was a package that said we're going to borrow, but we're going to invest in green transition, I think that's a far different proposition, and we wouldn't have had the same reaction from the market.
Do you think that was a kind of political mismatch to say that because we were actually going to cut the higher rate of tax, that would automatically lead to more growth because you'd have more people staying in the country, investment and so forth?
Well, I think, first of all, if you remember back in 1988, we're old enough to remember that, Margaret Thatcher said you can't buck the market. Well, she was right then, and she's right now. And I think the markets have been completely spooked, because all of the measures that Kwasi Kwarteng announced, I could probably sit here and argue why each one of them on its own individually was quite justified. But when you put them all together, and announce them all together at the same time in a situation where the country is in pretty dire financial circumstances. It doesn't add up. A lot of the tax cuts, for example, you can argue, well, do them, but do them when the economy is doing well and everyone's sort of feeling good about things. And the fact that they didn't do anything at the lower end of the income scales, and if they'd said...
Well, if they'd raised the level at which you pay income tax yet again, that would have helped.
Or they could have said, OK, we're going to reinstate the £20 universal credit uplift, or say, well, we're not only going to do that, we're going to make it £25. That would have spooked Labour, because it would have been quite difficult to argue against that.
But like Kitty, I'm interested in thinking, in terms of confidence, do you think it looked like the government was trying to pull a fast one without bringing in the OBR? Do you think that was the problem? Because they wouldn't have any forecast that would actually guarantee what they were doing was sound.
I think the big problem was the timing. And remember, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng have only been in office since the 6th of September. How can you create what wasn't a mini budget, it was a major budget in 2 weeks? How could you expect the OBR to get all their forecasts ready?
I think they could have done. They had the whole summer with the leadership campaign going on. I'm absolutely sure they had work streams.
They wouldn't have known that this was coming, would they?
Well, no, they would have done because the government would have known, because they were the government, and there was the.
It's not that this is a new government.
No. This is a new government, and the measures in this budget would never have been introduced.
No, there were
conversations.
There were back-channel conversations across the whole summer.
Were there?
In preparation for.
Most of them didn't leak.
Yeah. Well, no, it's all been discussed in the leadership campaign. I mean, all of this was being talked about. This was being promised.
Not reducing the top rate of tax.
I'm going to turn now to Tina McKenzie. Because you're a broadcasting professional, I'd just like you to lift your mic a bit further up your jacket. Thank you while I'm doing that. Tina McKenzie, how much lack of confidence is there from business, and how much do business actually, as Kitty was saying, welcome some of this?
Well, the thing is, what we have right now is a perfect storm for business. And we already had some of these issues before the announcements. And Kitty's right. We did want a reversal of national insurance, that's for sure. We also needed something in terms of the costs that businesses are carrying right now, the inflation. So we need a government to do something for us. In terms of the energy, energy is the one thing we're hearing most about. Now, they did cap the unit price, and they did say it's for 6 months. That doesn't give business stability. It's not long enough, and we were really clear to government, we wanted that cap for business, but 6 months isn't enough for us in terms of certainty. So it's a perfect storm, and now we have crashing of the currency. But interesting for British business, they're not sitting watching the currency markets. No. The currency markets are watching them. And until we get confidence back on the high streets, confidence back in our economy, then these things are going to continue to happen. So government's got to move and give more impact, actually get involved more, in order that we get that confidence in the market.
Well, funny, just talking earlier about mortgages, I mean, obviously some of you talk about the high street, a lot of estate agents and so forth, and things are moving already. If you have 3 big lenders, if you have Skipton, Virgin Money and Halifax in the space of 10 hours, you're going to have more.
And remember, people aren't just mortgaging for their houses. A lot of small businesses across the country have remortgaged in order to put it into their businesses over COVID. And so we have an extra 360 billion of debt since 2020 for small businesses in this country. So that's a real concern as interest rates go up, that a lot of people have remortgaged their homes in order to put money into other things, to keep their business doors open, to help their communities, to keep their family employed, to pay themselves at the end of the week. And we talk about minimum wage, and we talk about how we get an increased minimum wage, a living wage. A lot of the business people of this country on a Friday night are the only ones going home with no wage because their businesses are losing money.
And Kitty, presumably, if the base rate is 6%, then the banks are not going to be doing 6%, they're going to be doing higher. So we're going to have to see, and we just heard from people there that people are actually going ahead of the end of their fixed term mortgage to get ahead of the next one.
Yes.
And I mean, and therefore there lies complete madness.
Yes, and obviously the higher inflation is, the more rates will have to rise in order to try and bring demand down. Yes, so I mean, we have to, hope that the intervention on the energy price will be the driving factor in the next few months, so that when the forecasts finally do come, inflation does look like it's peaking round about now, then into the future. But without those independent judgments, go back to the original point, we don't know.
It's really important to say that the big driver of inflation, that might change after the government's measure. The big driver is still imported inflation. It's energy prices from outside. So we're in this strange situation where the bank is going to continue hiking rates, partly to counter what the government's doing. But there isn't excess demand in the economy, so it's completely counterintuitive. We're going to be tipped into recession. We're already in recession, but we could be in deeper recession.
Technically in recession, but not.
Deeper recession, and you've got the Bank of England pulling in one way, the government pulling in the other way. It's complete madness at the heart of economic policy.
But let's be clear, we've got a completely unexpected set of circumstances with energy, and everybody is scrabbling to do the best they can. Do you think, how long do you think the energy help should be for? If it's not 6 months, how long would you do? Would you do 2 years?
Well, so actually we modelled this, and we would have done 6 months because you needed something quite quick. And then we would have moved to a model of free basic energy, which essentially gives you the first slug of energy for free, and then you pay more if you use more energy. And actually that ends up being significantly less expensive.
But how does that help business?
Well, the problem is that a lot of businesses are really on the edge right now. We have a cost of doing business crisis, which is in fact the other side of the coin, of the same coin of the cost of living crisis. So until we get on top of that, we're going to start to see unemployment.
Yeah.
You know, we have got 8 million people in this country, nearly 1 in 4 in parts of the country that are economically inactive. And now we're going to see unemployment start to increase as these businesses close their door. So they've got to do something, and they've got to do more, and they've got to move even quicker, because we can't sit for months without action.
Ian, what do you make? It is only one poll, but the YouGov poll, 17% lead, the biggest in YouGov history. What do you make of that?
Well, it's an interesting poll. You can never go by one poll, but that is the biggest lead Labour have had. Generally, it's between sort of 5 and 10 points. But if you look at what they have to do to win an election, they need that kind of lead, because if to win, where I live in Kent, on the North Kent coast, all of those seats were Labour under Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and they now have 5-figure Tory majorities, some over 20,000, and those seats have got to be won back by Labour. And if you look at Scotland, and you assume that Labour aren't going to do, you know more about this than I do, assume they're not going to do well in Scotland, they have to win a huge amount of seats, and even with a 17% lead, that is by no means certain that Keir Starmer would have a majority.
Yeah. By no means certain, yeah.
No, I don't think it is certain. I mean, I think all projections suggest we're set for some sort of a hung parliament with maybe a supply and confidence arrangement. I don't know. So I think actually Labour...
With the Scottish Nationalists?
I don't know. But I think the job for Labour is they've got to set out a clear alternative now, so that the country has something to vote for, as well as voting against a government that's tanking the economy.
And if this is not just a fair weather poll, if I put it that way, and really the Conservatives have got to think really clearly about what's happening here, what the word in the street is that Liz Truss is fairly safe, but actually there's a possibility that Kwasi Kwarteng could be the casualty of all this, if it doesn't work out well in the next 6 months.
Well, imagine if in the next few days the pound, for whatever reason, the pound sinks to parity. I mean, back in 1967, when there was a devaluation crisis, the Chancellor of the Exchequer was forced out of his job, Jim Callaghan. It's possible, I mean, the Prime Minister's not going to be the casualty of this, because it will be blamed on the Chancellor. And I mean, he is on a pretty sticky wicket at the moment. But and the thing is, over the last 3 days, you would have expected a Chancellor to come out and try and reassure the markets, to try and install confidence, and he said nothing.
Well, he didn't say nothing. He said, actually, there's more tax cuts to come.
Well, and if that was all he could do to reassure the markets, it wasn't much reassurance,
well, it wouldn't be any reassurance at the moment.
To be fair, they did say today that there would be...
There's going to be two things, isn't there? There's going to be a plan, and there's going to be the medium-term forecast in November. But we might not get there.
But the Bank of England here, I mean, what are they doing to come out and say, well, of course, we will do something? Are they going to do it in 5 weeks when the Monetary Policy Committee meets again or something? I mean, I think the confidence of Conservative MPs in the Governor of the Bank of England is severely shot as well, whatever they might think of the Chancellor.
Do you agree with that, that the Bank of England has less of your confidence than it had before?
Well, if there's anything that 2008 taught us, is it's not all about pure economics. Right? You know, we know for sure that just because they increase the interest rates, it's not going to solve this problem. And in fact, the cure could end up being a bigger disease. By putting interest rates up so far, people actually don't have money in their pockets and can't pay their bills, can't go and shop, we close more businesses. So we've just got to be careful that we just don't go down a one-way street and the Bank of England just keeps increasing interest rates, and it does not solve the problem.
We're just going to look now. Thank you very much, everybody. I am just going to do this so that we can actually look and see what the paper is doing tomorrow morning. And there we have it. Thank you all to you. The Times, first of all, bank vows to step in after a day of turmoil. Governor sets out further interest rate rise. Lenders pull mortgage deals as sterling falls. Moving on to the Daily Mail. Fury at the City Slickers betting against the UK PLC. Speculators profit from a fall in the pound. Sterling rallies in a volatile day. No. And now fears of rate rise and mortgage payment. I think the pound fell again. Spooked lenders ditch new mortgages in pound chaos. There we have it. Bank of England face-to-face with the Treasury. And Russia to expel Japanese spy caught red-handed is their bottom story. And finally, on The Guardian, sterling crisis deepens as Truss's strategy unravels. And there we have on the right-hand side just what Peter Mandelson said he was saying in that film there from Nick Watt. Starmer, Labour is the party of the centre. Well, thank you all to all my guests here, and thank you to you for watching. We'll be back here in Liverpool tomorrow night. Until then, goodbye.